All right, what's tip number 2, please?
So tip number 2 is to treat the act of teacher development like teaching.
Yeah, let's go for it.
So I'm talking specifically about the strategies that we employ when supporting others and improving, the physical act, I think it is. And the more I do it, the more I see the connection between how I would teach a class and how I would teach a teacher to teach. So, I think if you very crudely broke the essence of teaching down, it might look something like explain, model and practice. And I think I would use the same model when working with teachers in my schools. I would explain something, I'd model it, and then they would be given a chance to practice, and we'd almost repeat that cycle. I think some of the particular points that stand out to me are the idea that we remember what we pay attention to, and we'll come to this in a later tip. But I think when we ask teachers to pay attention to too much, we're thinking about the EF report, and Sam Sims talking about how we need to account for cognitive load when we're training our teachers, and he's probably talking about big inset days as much as he's talking about coaching with teachers. But if we're very specific, okay, I want you to pay attention to this, you will attend to this one particular idea, then we're more likely to enact that in the classroom. And I think we expect our pupils to pay attention to the meaningful components of our lessons. I think Daisy Christodoulou's component parts, making good progress, she talks about the goal state and your current state. And Michael Persson pushed me on this a bit, because he likes to talk about generalizations and broader behaviours, but I do think there is a place for breaking sort of bigger behaviours down into smaller parts, getting good at the smaller parts and then bringing them back together again, just like the football players might do on a Saturday when they've been training different things all week. So maybe the jury's still out. I'd probably defer to Michael most times, but this is the way I've been sort of approaching teacher development in my current role. And then I think with explicit language instruction, I want my pupils to know what the quotient is. I want them to know what the minuend and the subtrahend are, because they can use one word instead of 7 or 8. And if we do the same and codify the act of teaching, then I think we have a better chance of sort of engaging on a more meaningful level. And I know that people like Peps and stuff have talked about that for quite a while now, but it definitely has a massive impact when you're talking the same language.
This is dead interesting, this, Kieran. Right, let's dive into this a little bit more. Can you give us an example, perhaps, of either some training that you've led or some coaching that you've done where you've adopted this explain, model, practice approach?
I mean, typically I'll have a math-specific sort of input with all our teachers on the first Tuesday of the term. And so I'll say, okay, right, we're going to look at worked examples, for instance. Okay, here's what worked examples are. And then over the next 6 weeks, I'll go into classes. I'll teach people's classes. This is how I interpret this. This is how I might do this. And then gradually, if I'm working with someone and they're an early career teacher, they might get more support than others. So it'll be me teaching 100% of the lesson at the start. And then by the time you get to 3 weeks later, responsibility is shifted to them. So we gradually fade, just like we would do with sort of backwards faded example. Teacher takes more responsibility for that particular part until eventually at the end I can sort of leave that plate spinning, because they're more effective than I have at the whatever we've sort of explored.
This is really interesting, this. So I've been messing around with this myself. So first thing to say, I'll just put my cards on the table. Massive error I've made is the way I delivered CPD was nothing like how I taught. And it was a disaster waiting to happen. So, I've said this before. I'm a real group work skeptic. I'm terrible at group work, Kieran. Sammy Kempner, when he was on the show, he's changed my life thinking about group work. But I'm woeful at it. And yet CPD, how would things be set up? The tables would be in groups with the teachers. And again, whenever I attend CPD and I see tables sat in groups, I think, well, this is just a bit of a sit-off waiting to happen here. And it's just, I never fully engage with it. So now I really try and think of my CPD as how I would kind of teach lessons. Exactly as you say, what am I focusing the attention on here? How can I remove distractions and so on? So that was the first thing I wanted to say. And then just 2 concrete examples that I've used. And I just want either get your take or if there's anything you want to add to this. And mini whiteboards comes up at every single Tips for Teachers conversation. And I'd say if it was a drinking game, people would be hammered on mini whiteboards here because it comes up all the time. But recently I've been doing quite a bit of CPD around mini whiteboards, and I've found the best way to get people on board is to show them how useful mini whiteboards are almost by stealth. So you make it look like the CPD's on something else, like, planning for depth or whatever it may be, but you use the mini whiteboard to facilitate paired discussion or to facilitate checking for understanding. And then at the end you can say, okay, look, we've been using this tool, how could we then apply it to our lesson? So I think that works quite well, almost when you almost use the medium that you want to kind of train staff on, but you use it in a slightly different context to show the power. I don't know if that makes sense at all.
No, it does make total sense. And I think, when you're delivering CPD, utilising your sort of teaching strategies from the classroom, I think can really help. Because if you, for instance, did some CPD on perhaps, I don't know, cognitive load theory, and you looked at, the combination, very crude example of images and sort of key vocabulary, well then you might use that in the rest of your CPD so that you're showing teachers, this is stuff we do all the time, or the use of multiple choice questions. I'll quite often put a multiple choice question from, spacing things out, something from the first session, something from the last session, and then when we come to the session on memory, people are going, oh, okay,
yeah, nice.
I get it, and then they feel it. So I totally agree with you.
Let me just ask you one final one on this, Kieran, because I've been looking forward to asking somebody this, and you're my man for this. So, what I try and do whenever I kind of coach teachers or do CPD and so on, is to try and do two things: make them feel like the student so they can experience what it's going to be like for their learners, and then so I get them doing like the maths and the activities and so on, and then I say, okay, right, now we're going to jump out of that and now let's put our teacher hat on and think kind of pedagogically what we need to change to make this work and so on. But the difficulty I have, and even this is at secondary level, so this is why I'm interested in what it's like at primary level, is it's quite hard to make the teachers feel like students because of, like, the examples we invariably use are pretty straightforward ones. So, like in maths, I'll come up. Let's say I'm doing something on learner-generated examples or whatever it may be. I'll say, okay, think of two fractions that add together to make one or whatever it is. Teachers just whiz it down straight away. Whereas, obviously, the students, they're going to take a bit more time, maybe they're going to want to ask somebody and so on. So I find it hard to fully replicate how the students will act in the thing that I'm doing the CPD on. But that feels like a real problem with the CPD, because I need teachers to appreciate that so they can then empathise with their learners and so on. So that was a bit of a ramble. Do you know what I mean there? And have you experienced this? Because I imagine at primary level this is an even bigger issue.
I think it's potentially easier when you know the teachers you're working with. So I've been working with our guys for 5 years, and I will always use examples that are just beyond where they're working mathematically. So you'll find questions with triangular numbers and the solution being
nice, yes.
Or if you think about Anne Watson and the paper on taxi cab geometry, they managed to make those teachers, even though they were specialists, believe that they were working in Euclidean geometry, but actually they were working in non-Euclidean geometry.
Yes.
So almost, that was like a watershed moment. Okay, right, so this is just beyond. Yeah, but I do think it's easier when you work with the teachers every day and you know what their mathematics is. That's
like. Interesting. So let's take your worked example thing. If you're doing worked example training and you wanted the teachers to experience what the worked example's like, you wouldn't do a worked example from kind of year 2 mathematics. You may in fact do a worked example from a higher level of maths so that the teachers feel like the novices that the kids would be. Would that be right, Kieran?
At the point that I want them to feel that sensation. Obviously I will illuminate and illustrate with examples that are phase specific, but when I want them to have the sensation of the learner, then I would choose something that's maybe Key Stage 3, bridge into Key Stage 4.
That's brilliant, right. I'm going to have to brush up on my further maths and start whipping some of that out for the secondary colleagues. That's brilliant. Love it.